April 11th, 1951, a date that would forever change the course of the Cold War. At 1 a.m., a weary press corps was summoned to the White House for an announcement that no one saw coming. President Harry S. Truman had done the unthinkable. He had fired the legendary General Douglas MacArthur. The hero of the Pacific, the man who rebuilt Japan, was gone with a single stroke of a pen. Tonight, we look back at the clash of titans that pushed America to the brink of a constitutional crisis. To understand why this explosion happened, we must look at the frozen battlefields of Korea. By 1951, the war had reached a bloody stalemate. General MacArthur, the tactical genius of Incheon, wanted total victory. He pushed for the bombing of Chinese bases and the use of nationalist Chinese troops. But in Washington, President Truman feared a much darker outcome: World War III. Truman wanted a limited war to contain communism without triggering a nuclear holocaust with the Soviet Union. This wasn't just a military disagreement. It was a battle for the very soul of American foreign policy. MacArthur, ever the defiant soldier, began bypassing his commander-in-chief, sending letters to Congress and the press, openly critiquing the White House. The fuse was lit. MacArthur was more than a general. To many, he was a living god. But his ego was his Achilles heel. He believed that the politician's role was to provide the means, and the soldier's role was to win the war, regardless of the global consequences. The breaking point came in March 1951. MacArthur sent a letter to House Minority Leader Joseph Martin, openly mocking Truman's limited war strategy. When Martin read that letter on the floor of Congress, the words echoed like a gunshot across Washington. MacArthur's closing line became legendary: "There is no substitute for victory." For Truman, this was the final straw. He realized he no longer had a general who followed orders. He had a rival who was trying to dictate American destiny from the battlefield. Behind the closed doors of the White House, the air was thick with tension and cigarette smoke. For 5 agonizing days, Truman met in secret with his top advisors, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He asked them a single, chilling question: is MacArthur's removal necessary for the security of the United States? The answer was a unanimous, heavy yes. They knew that if a general could defy a president and get away with it, the very foundation of American democracy was at stake. Truman sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the dismissal order. He knew that firing the most popular man in America would be political suicide. But Harry Truman was a man who lived by the sign on his desk: "The buck stops here." With a steady hand, he picked up his pen and signed the document that would ignite a national firestorm. It was 1 a.m. on the East Coast when the news broke. Reporters scrambled, telephones screamed, and the news wires hummed with a message that seemed impossible. Across the nation, Americans were jolted awake by their radios to a reality they couldn't accept. Truman's official statement was cold and final. Full military command in the Far East is being relinquished by General Douglas MacArthur. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. In cities from New York to San Francisco, people took to the streets in disbelief. To the American public, Truman hadn't just fired a general, he had fired a hero. Within hours, thousands of telegrams flooded the White House, many calling for the president's impeachment. The man from Missouri had just ignited the greatest political storm of the 20th century. When MacArthur finally stepped onto American soil for the first time in years, the reception was nothing short of messianic. In San Francisco and New York, millions lined the streets for ticker tape parades that dwarfed the celebrations of World War II. People wept as he passed. On April 19th, he stood before a joint session of Congress, his voice calm, resonant, and dripping with drama. It was one of the most powerful speeches in American history. He defended his actions, criticized the timidity of Washington, and then he delivered the line that would echo through the ages. Old soldiers never die. They just fade away. As he walked out of the Capitol, the nation was under his spell, and Truman's popularity hit an all-time low. It seemed the general had won the battle for the American heart. But the emotional high of the parade couldn't last forever. In the weeks that followed, the battle moved from the streets to the quiet, wood-paneled rooms of the Senate hearings. For 7 weeks, military leaders testified behind closed doors, away from the cheering crowds. General Omar Bradley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, delivered a devastating blow to MacArthur's vision of total war. He famously stated that a full-scale conflict with China would be the wrong war, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and with the wrong enemy. Slowly, the fever of the nation began to break. The American public started to realize that while they loved the hero, they feared the prospect of World War III. Truman's unpopular decision, once seen as an insult, began to look like a courageous act of global preservation. General MacArthur did not return to the battlefield. Instead, he took up residence in a palatial suite at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, becoming a living monument to a bygone era. For a brief moment, it seemed he would march straight into the White House in the 1952 election. But the MacArthur fever that had gripped the nation began to cool as quickly as it had ignited. The American public started to realize that while he was a brilliant tactical genius, the age of the absolute military hero was shifting. He spent his final years as a high-level corporate executive, advising presidents from the sidelines, but never again holding the reins of power. The old soldier was indeed beginning to fade away, leaving behind a legacy that was as brilliant as it was controversial. For Harry Truman, the victory was a bitter one. He left the Oval Office in 1953 with some of the lowest approval ratings in the history of the presidency. He was mocked in the press, burned in effigy, and dismissed by his critics as a failed haberdasher from Missouri who was out of his depth. Yet, Truman never wavered. He understood a truth that MacArthur could not accept. In a nuclear age, a loose cannon general was a risk the planet could not afford. By asserting civilian control over the military, Truman preserved the very heartbeat of the American Constitution. He chose to be hated in his time so that the world might have a future. Decades later, history would vindicate the man from Missouri, transforming him from a political pariah into a titan of presidential courage. While the titans clashed in the halls of power, the average GI was fighting a brutal, freezing war in the mountains of Korea. This conflict would eventually be dubbed the Forgotten War, largely because the political firestorm between Truman and MacArthur dominated the headlines and the history books. For the soldiers in the foxholes, the high-level debate about limited war versus total victory wasn't an academic exercise. It was a matter of survival. The dismissal of MacArthur signaled a shift in how America would fight its future conflicts, no longer seeking the unconditional surrender of the enemy, but managing global tensions through proxy wars and containment. It was the birth of the modern geopolitical landscape, where the threat of the mushroom cloud dictated the limits of the bayonet. The firing of MacArthur also solidified a doctrine that would guide the West for decades: containment. Proposed by diplomats like George Kennan, this strategy argued that the Soviet Union didn't need to be defeated in a direct, apocalyptic war, but rather contained within its current borders until it collapsed from its own internal contradictions. MacArthur viewed this as cowardice. He believed that in war, there is no substitute for victory. But Truman understood that in the atomic age, victory had a different definition. If winning in Korea meant losing New York or London to Soviet nukes, then it wasn't a victory at all. This ideological chasm was the true reason for the firing, and it set the rules of engagement for the Cold War, from Vietnam to the fall of the Berlin Wall. While America was tearing itself apart in a domestic political frenzy, the rest of the world watched with bated breath. In Moscow, Joseph Stalin studied the reports from Washington with a cold, calculating eye. To the Soviets, MacArthur was a wild card, a man whose unpredictability could ignite a nuclear exchange at any moment. The news of his firing brought a secret sigh of relief to the Kremlin. Meanwhile, in Beijing, Mao Zedong saw the dismissal as a sign that the United States was not prepared for an all-out war on the Asian mainland. The global chess match was at its most dangerous point, and the removal of the American shogun changed the gravity of the entire Cold War. It proved that despite the internal chaos, the American system was still governed by laws, not by the whims of a single powerful general. As the Senate hearings dragged on into the humid Washington summer of 1951, the Great Debate began to reshape the American psyche. People who had once burned Truman in effigy were now listening to the cold, hard facts of logistics, nuclear stockpiles, and global alliances. They learned that the Joint Chiefs of Staff were not just following Truman's orders. They were the ones who had whispered the necessity of MacArthur's removal into his ear. The hearings acted as a massive national education in the realities of the atomic age. The hero worship of the past was being replaced by a sober, often painful understanding of the present. America was growing up, realizing that in this new world, courage wasn't just found on the battlefield, but in the quiet, agonizing restraint of the commander-in-chief. The true legacy of April 11, 1951, wasn't found in a trophy or a territory won. It was found in the quiet, unbreakable principle of civilian control over the military. By firing MacArthur, Truman reaffirmed that in the United States, no soldier, no matter how decorated, no matter how beloved, is above the elected will of the people. It prevented the rise of a military junta and ensured that the finger on the nuclear trigger would always belong to a civilian answerable to the voters. This precedent protected the American experiment during its darkest hours of the Cold War. It sent a clear message to every general who would follow: your duty is to the Constitution, not to your own glory. Harry Truman may have lost the battle for the headlines in 1951, but he won the war for the future of American democracy. As the 1950s rolled on, the shadows of both men began to lengthen. In 1952, the American people chose a different kind of general to lead them: Dwight D. Eisenhower. Unlike MacArthur, Eisenhower was a diplomat soldier who understood the necessity of alliances and the restraint of power. The era of the old soldier was officially coming to an end, replaced by the organized, corporate-style leadership of the mid-century. MacArthur remained in his Waldorf suite, a ghost of a more heroic, more dangerous time. Truman retired to Independence, Missouri, taking walks as a private citizen, often ignored by the world he had helped save. But the tension between these two giants had forged a new America, one that was more cautious, more global, and more aware of the devastating price of total victory. Today, the names of Truman and MacArthur are etched in the granite of history, two titans who, in their own way, loved their country above all else. One was a master of the battlefield, the other, a guardian of the Constitution. Their confrontation reminds us that the true strength of a nation is not measured solely by its military might, but by the integrity of its institutions. As the sun sets on the era of the great generals, we are left with a simple, yet profound lesson. In a democracy, Even the most powerful sword must ultimately bow to the pen of the people. Thank you for joining us on this journey through America's past. If you value these stories of our shared heritage, consider subscribing to American Remembered. Together, we keep the echoes of history alive for the generations to come.